Welcome back, friend. Welcome to Mythic Nights. Settle in wherever you are. Tonight we're returning to ancient Greece, to a time of heroes and monsters, of impossible tasks and extraordinary courage. Tonight, we're going to tell the story of Hercules, or Heracles as the Greeks called him, the strongest man who ever lived, the greatest hero of the ancient world, a man who faced 12 impossible labors and completed every single one. You may have heard pieces of his story before. The lion he strangled with his bare hands, the many-headed Hydra, the journey to the Underworld itself. But tonight we'll hear it all from beginning to end. Not just the labors, but the man himself, how he came to be, why he had to complete these tasks, and what he became in the end. This is a story about strength, yes, but it's also about redemption, about a man who made a terrible mistake and spent years trying to atone for it, about someone who kept going, even when the task seemed impossible, even when he wanted to give up. It's a story the Greeks told for centuries, a story that still resonates today, because we all carry burdens, we all face challenges that seem too great. We all wonder sometimes if we have the strength to keep going. Hercules' story says you do. You're stronger than you know, so take a breath, let it out slowly. We have all night. We'll take our time with this tale. Let it unfold naturally. Let it carry you somewhere peaceful. The greatest hero who ever lived is waiting. His story begins not with glory, but with jealousy, deception, and a child born under a curse. Let's begin. Our story begins, as so many Greek stories do, with Zeus. Zeus, king of the gods, lord of thunder, had a wandering eye. We talked about this when we met Hera, how Zeus's infidelities caused so much pain, so much conflict. And this time his eye fell upon a mortal woman named Alcmene. Alcmene lived in Thebes. She was married to Amphitryon, a military commander, a good man, and she was faithful to him, devoted. She was known for her virtue, her loyalty. She was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of woman who would never betray her husband. But Zeus wanted her. And Zeus, when he wanted something, found a way. Amphitryon had gone away to war, leading his soldiers in battle. While he was gone, Zeus came to Alcmene, but not as himself. He disguised himself as Amphitryon. He looked exactly like her husband, spoke like him, knew everything a husband would know. Alcmene, believing this was her beloved husband, returned home early from war, welcomed him. She had no idea she was being deceived, no idea that the man in her arms was a god wearing her husband's face. That night, Zeus made the night last longer. 3 nights compressed into one, the sun held back from rising. And from that union, Alcmene conceived a child. The next day, the real Amphitryon came home from war, and he too lay with his wife. From that union, Alcmene conceived a second child, twins but not quite twins. One was the son of Zeus, divine blood in his veins. The other was the son of Amphitryon, fully mortal. Both growing in Alcmene's womb, both destined to be born on the same day. Alcmene didn't know. She thought both children were her husband's. She had done nothing wrong, made no choice to betray anyone, and yet she was carrying the child of Zeus, and that meant she was carrying Hera's wrath as well. Because Hera knew. She always knew. And she was furious. This child, this son of Zeus, would be born with divine strength, destined for greatness. Zeus, in his pride, boasted to the other gods, "The next child born of my bloodline will rule over all those around him." Hera heard that boast, and she acted quickly. There was another child of Zeus's bloodline about to be born, Eurystheus, son of Zeus's son Perseus, grandson of Zeus. He was due to be born on the same day as Alcmene's child. Hera went to the goddess of childbirth, Eileithyia, and commanded her, "Delay Alcmene's labor. Make Eurystheus be born first." Eileithyia obeyed. She sat outside Alcmene's door with her legs crossed, her hands clasped, sympathetic magic binding Alcmene's womb, preventing the birth. For 7 days and 7 nights, Alcmene suffered in labor, unable to deliver, the children trapped inside her. Finally, Alcmene's servant, a clever woman named Galantis, realized what was happening. She ran outside and shouted to Eileithyia, "The babies are born. The children have arrived." Eileithyia, startled, jumped up, uncrossing her legs, unclasping her hands. The spell broke. And immediately Alcmene gave birth 2 sons. The first was large, strong, perfect, the son of Zeus. The second, born moments later, was smaller, mortal, the son of Amphitryon. They named the divine child Alcaeus at first, but later he would be called Heracles, which means glory of Hera, though that name would prove bitterly ironic. The Romans would later call him Hercules, and that's the name most people know today. We'll use both names as the stories do. Amphitryon raised both boys as his own. He didn't know one was Zeus's son. Or if he suspected, he never said. He loved them both, taught them both, treated them equally. But Hera's anger didn't end with the difficult birth. She wanted this child dead. When Heracles was just 8 months old, still an infant, barely able to crawl, Hera sent 2 enormous serpents to his cradle. It was night. The household was asleep. The serpents slithered silently into the nursery where both babies lay. The mortal twin Iphicles saw them first. He screamed in terror, waking the household. Amphitryon and Alcmene ran to the nursery, grabbing torches and weapons. But when they arrived, they found something astonishing. Baby Heracles had grabbed both serpents, one in each tiny hand. He was laughing, squeezing them, shaking them like toys. The serpents writhed and hissed, trying to strike, trying to escape. But the child's grip was unbreakable. He strangled them both, still gurgling with infant laughter, not understanding the danger, just knowing these were interesting, moving things to grab. The serpents died, and Amphitryon and Alcmene stared at their child, understanding for the first time that he was not normal, not merely mortal. Something divine was in him. From that night on, they knew Heracles was special, and they tried to raise him accordingly. As he grew, Heracles was educated by the best teachers in Greece. Amphitryon himself taught him to drive a chariot. Autolycus, the master thief, taught him wrestling and cunning. Eurytus taught him archery, and Heracles became the finest archer in the world. Castor taught him swordsmanship and fighting in armor. Linus, the great musician, tried to teach him music and poetry. That last one didn't go well. Heracles had no patience for music. When Linus corrected him harshly one day, striking him, the boy's temper flared. Heracles picked up his lyre and struck Linus with it, killing him instantly. He hadn't meant to. He didn't know his own strength yet. But the teacher was dead nonetheless. Heracles was put on trial for murder. He argued that he'd acted in self-defense, striking back against someone who hit him first. The court acquitted him, but Amphitryon, worried about his son's temper and strength, sent him away to the mountains to tend cattle, hoping hard work and solitude would teach him control. In the mountains, Heracles grew into a man. Not just any man, the strongest man who had ever lived. He stood over 6 feet tall, enormously muscled, capable of feats no one else could match. He could bend bronze, lift boulders, wrestle bulls to the ground. His strength was simply beyond mortal measure. One day, a lion began attacking the cattle. Not a normal lion, but a huge beast that was terrorizing the whole region. Heracles tracked it for 50 days until he finally caught it. He killed it with his bare hands and wore its hide as a trophy. When he returned to Thebes, he was a hero. The king, Creon, was so grateful that he gave Heracles his daughter Megara as a bride. Heracles married Megara, and they were happy. They had children together. 3 sons, some stories say, others say as many as 8. Heracles loved his family. He was a devoted father, a good husband. After years of training and hardship, he had finally found peace. He had a home, a family, a purpose. For a time life was good, but Hera had not forgotten. She had been waiting, watching, patient as only an immortal can be patient. She wanted to hurt Heracles, truly hurt him, in a way that would break him. So she sent madness upon him. It came suddenly, without warning. One moment, Heracles was himself, a loving father playing with his children, a devoted husband embracing his wife. The next moment his mind twisted. Hera clouded his vision, his thoughts. She made him see enemies where there were none. She made him see monsters where his family stood. In his madness, Heracles thought his home was under attack. He thought his children were enemy soldiers. He thought his wife was a threat. And he defended his home the only way he knew how, with violence, with his terrible strength. When the madness lifted, when Hera released him and clarity returned, Heracles found himself surrounded by bodies. His children lay dead by his own hand. His beloved Megara, some stories say he killed her too. Others say she survived, but could never look at him again, could never forgive what he'd done. Either way, his family was destroyed. And Heracles had done it himself. The horror of that realization nearly destroyed him. This man who had strangled serpents as an infant, who had the strength of a god, who had never been defeated in battle. He was brought to his knees by grief and guilt. He had killed the people he loved most in the world. It didn't matter that he'd been mad, that Hera had cursed him, that it wasn't truly his fault. His hands had done the deed. His strength had destroyed his family. For days he locked himself away, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to function. His friends found him and bound him to a pillar to keep him from harming himself. They talked to him, tried to comfort him, tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, but Heracles knew the truth. Mad or not, cursed or not, he had done this. And he had to find a way to atone. When he finally emerged from his grief enough to speak, he said he would go to Delphi. He would consult the oracle. He would ask Apollo what he must do to purify himself, to make amends for the blood on his hands. His friends tried to stop him. "You were cursed," they said. "It was Hera's doing. You bear no guilt." But Heracles disagreed. Curse or not, he had wielded the weapons. He had struck the blows. And he would pay the price, whatever it was. So he left Thebes, left the home where his family had died, left everything he had known, and traveled to Delphi. A broken man seeking redemption. A hero at his lowest point, not yet understanding that this was just the beginning, that the road ahead would be long and hard and filled with monsters and trials, but also not understanding that he would walk that road, that he would complete every task set before him, that through his labors he would transform his guilt and grief into something else, into legend. The greatest hero of Greece began his true journey not in triumph, but in tragedy. Not in strength, but in sorrow. And now, covered in the blood of his own family, Heracles walked the road to Delphi, seeking the oracle, seeking penance, seeking a way to live with what he had done. The road to Delphi winds through the mountains, climbing toward the sacred sanctuary of Apollo. Heracles walked it alone, carrying nothing but his grief and his guilt. Other travelers on that road gave him space. They could see something in him, the slumped shoulders of a man defeated, the haunted look in his eyes. This was not the triumphant hero who had killed the lion. This was a broken man seeking answers. Delphi itself sits on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, a place of stark beauty. The Greeks called it the navel of the world, the center of everything. The temple of Apollo stood there, white columns gleaming in the sun, and beneath it, the chamber where the oracle spoke Apollo's prophecies. Heracles climbed the steps to the temple. He brought offerings, what little he had. He waited his turn among the other suppliants, the other people seeking guidance from the god. When his time came, he was led down into the inner chamber. There in the darkness sat the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, an older woman seated on a bronze tripod over a crack in the earth. Vapors rose from that crack, sacred fumes that put the priestess into a trance, allowing Apollo to speak through her. Heracles knelt before her, and he asked his question. How can I purify myself? What must I do to atone for the blood I have shed? The Pythia breathed the vapors. Her eyes went distant. When she spoke, her voice had a strange quality, layered, echoing, not quite her own. She said, "You must go to Tiryns. You must present yourself to King Eurystheus. You must serve him for 12 years. Whatever labors he demands of you, you must complete them. Only then will you be purified. Only then will the stain of blood be washed from your hands. 12 years. 12 years of service to another man, and not just any man, Eurystheus." Heracles knew that name. Everyone in Greece knew that name. Eurystheus was his cousin, descended from Perseus, who was descended from Zeus. But more importantly, Eurystheus was the one who had been born first, the one who had inherited the kingship that might have been Heracles's, if not for Hera's interference. Eurystheus ruled Tiryns and Mycenae, powerful cities, But he was known to be a small man, not physically small, though he was that too, but small in spirit, petty, cowardly, jealous of greater men. The kind of king who inherited power rather than earned it, and Hera had made sure he was born first, specifically to rule over Heracles. This was her design all along, not just to make Heracles suffer, but to humiliate him, to force the greatest hero in Greece to bow before a lesser man. The oracle's words hung in the air. 12 years, serving Eurystheus, completing whatever tasks he demanded. Heracles could have refused. He was strong enough to refuse, powerful enough to walk away, to ignore the oracle's command. No one could force him to do anything, but he had come seeking purification. He had come asking for a way to atone, and this was the answer. This was the price. He bowed his head. He accepted. The Pythia, still in her trance, spoke again. She said, "You shall no longer be called Alcaeus, your birth name. From this day forward you are Heracles, glory of Hera. You will bear that name as a reminder of who sent this fate upon you. And perhaps one day you will earn the glory that name promises." It was cruel, that name. Glory of Hera, the goddess who hated him, who had destroyed his family, who had engineered his entire fall. He would carry her name as a brand, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. But Heracles accepted it, all of it, the service, the humiliation, the name. He rose from his knees. He left the oracle's chamber. He walked out into the sunlight, and he turned his feet toward Tiryns, toward Eurystheus, toward whatever waited for him there. The journey to Tiryns took several days. With each step, Heracles felt the weight of what he was about to do. He who had never bowed to anyone would bow to Eurystheus. He who had commanded respect through his strength and his deeds would become a servant. But there was no other way. This was his punishment. This was his path to redemption. When he arrived at Tiryns, the city walls loomed above him, massive stones fitted together, so large that later generations would believe giants must have built them. He entered through the gates and made his way to the palace. Eurystheus received him in the throne room. The king sat on his throne, trying to look regal, trying to look commanding. But Heracles could see the fear in his eyes. Eurystheus knew exactly who stood before him, the strongest man alive, the son of Zeus, a man who could tear this palace apart with his bare hands if he chose. But Heracles did not threaten. He did not glower. He simply knelt. "I am here to serve," he said. "The oracle has commanded it. For 12 years I am yours to command. Give me tasks and I will complete them. This is my penance." Eurystheus stared at him, hardly believing it. Heracles, the great Heracles, kneeling before him, submitting to him. A slow smile spread across the king's face. Oh, he would use this. He would use this fully. He had always been jealous of Heracles, jealous of his strength, his fame, his divine parentage. And now Heracles was in his power. The king leaned forward on his throne. "Very well," he said. "I accept your service, and I have tasks for you, Heracles. Labors that need completing, monsters that need slaying, impossible things that no mortal man could achieve." He paused, letting that sink in, then added, "But you're not quite mortal, are you? So perhaps you'll succeed, or perhaps you'll die trying." "Either way I win." Heracles said nothing. He simply waited, head still bowed, for his first command. Eurystheus savored the moment. Then he spoke. "Your first labor is this. There is a lion in Nemea, terrorizing the countryside. No weapon can pierce its hide. Men have tried to kill it and failed. Bring me that lion's pelt. Bring it to me as proof of your success." He waved his hand dismissively. "Go now, and don't return until it's done." Heracles rose. He turned without a word and left the throne room. He left the palace. He walked out of Tiryns and set his face toward Nemea, toward his first labor, toward the beginning of a journey that would take him 12 years and carry him to every corner of Greece and beyond. Behind him, Eurystheus sat on his throne, pleased with himself. He had given Heracles an impossible task. The Nemean Lion had killed dozens of men. Its hide was impervious to weapons. No one had ever come close to defeating it. Surely, Eurystheus thought, this would be the end of Heracles. The great hero would die in Nemea, and Eurystheus would finally be free of his shadow. But Eurystheus didn't understand something important. He didn't understand that Heracles wasn't fighting for glory anymore. He wasn't fighting to prove his strength or to win fame. He was fighting for redemption, for purification, for the chance to wash the blood from his hands and perhaps one day to forgive himself. And a man fighting for that will not give up, will not fail, will find a way no matter what. The labors of Heracles were about to begin. 12 tasks, 12 trials, 12 steps on the long road from tragedy to triumph. And the first step led to Nemea, to a cave in the hills, to a lion that had never been defeated. Let's follow him there now. Let's watch as the greatest hero of Greece faces his first impossible challenge. Labor 1. The Nemean Lion Nemea was a valley in the northeastern Peloponnese, surrounded by hills covered in olive groves and dotted with small farms. It should have been peaceful, prosperous, but for months now it had lived in terror. The lion had come from nowhere, or perhaps from Hera herself, some said, sent specifically to kill Heracles. It was enormous, larger than any normal lion with a hide that gleamed golden in the sunlight. And it was hungry. It had killed shepherds, farmers, travelers. It had dragged cattle from their pens and sheep from their pastures. Whole families had abandoned their homes, fleeing to the cities. Those who stayed lived behind locked doors, afraid to venture out even in daylight. Men had tried to hunt it. Warriors had come with their finest weapons, bronze-tipped spears, iron swords, arrows with sharp points. They had tracked it to its lair in the hills, a cave with 2 entrances. They had surrounded it, attacked it with everything they had. None of them survived. The lion's hide was impervious. Arrows bounced off it. Spears shattered against it. Swords simply slid across its surface without cutting. And the lion itself was fast, powerful, intelligent. It knew how to hunt men just as it hunted any other prey. When Heracles arrived in Nemea, the people were desperate. They had heard he was coming, sent by King Eurystheus, they said, to kill the beast. Some had hope. Others just shook their heads. So many had tried. So many had died. Heracles didn't go to the lion immediately. First he talked to the people. He asked them about the creature's habits, where it hunted when it returned to its cave, how it moved. He studied the land, the hills, the cave itself with its 2 entrances. He could see the bones outside the cave. Animal bones mostly, but some human. He could see the tracks, massive paw prints in the dirt, claw marks on stones. This was no ordinary beast. Heracles had his bow with him, his sword, his club, a massive olive wood club he had carved himself. He tried first with arrows, just to confirm what he'd been told. He shot at the lion from a distance when it emerged from its cave one evening. The arrow flew true, struck the lion's flank, and bounced off harmlessly. The lion didn't even flinch. It just turned its massive head toward him, eyes gleaming, and roared. The sound shook the hills. Birds scattered from the trees. And Heracles understood. Weapons would not work here. This labor would require something else, strength, his own hands. The one thing that had never failed him. He tracked the lion back to its cave and studied the entrances. 2 ways in, 2 ways out. If he chased it in one side, it could escape out the other. So Heracles gathered boulders, huge stones that normal men would need teams of oxen to move, and he blocked one entrance completely, sealing it shut. Now there was only one way in. One way out. Heracles took a deep breath. He left his weapons behind, useless here. He walked into the cave empty-handed, into the darkness, following the lion's scent, listening for its breathing. The cave tunneled back into the hillside, narrowing as it went. Heracles had to bend, then crouch, then crawl. And somewhere ahead in the darkness the lion waited. His eyes adjusted slowly. He could make out shapes now. The curve of the tunnel, the gleam of bones, and there ahead, 2 eyes reflecting what little light reached this deep. The lion saw him. It crouched, muscles bunching. Then it charged. In that narrow space there was nowhere to dodge, nowhere to run. The lion leaped, claws extended, jaws open, and Heracles met it head-on. They collided with tremendous force. The lion's claws raked across Heracles' skin, drawing blood. Its teeth snapped at his throat. But Heracles got his arms around the beast, one arm around its neck, the other pinning its body, and he squeezed. The lion thrashed, incredibly strong, fighting with every ounce of its power. Its hind legs kicked, claws tearing. It twisted and writhed, trying to break free. But Heracles held on. His muscles strained. His arms ached. Blood from his wounds ran down his sides, but he didn't let go. He squeezed harder. The lion's struggles grew weaker. Its breathing became labored, then stopped. Its body went limp. Heracles held on for a long time after it stopped moving, making absolutely sure. Finally, he released it. The Nemean Lion lay dead at his feet, killed by the only thing that could kill it, raw strength applied directly, without the need for weapons. Heracles dragged the lion's body out of the cave, out into the sunlight. The people of Nemea saw him emerge, bloody and exhausted, carrying the impossible beast. They couldn't believe it. The monster that had terrorized them for months was dead, but Heracles' labor wasn't finished. Eurystheus had asked for the pelt. Heracles needed to skin the lion. He tried with his knife, no good. The blade wouldn't cut the hide. He tried with a sharp stone, same result. Nothing could pierce that golden skin. Then he had an idea. If nothing could cut the hide from the outside, perhaps the hide itself could cut the hide. He used one of the lion's own claws as a blade. That worked. Slowly, carefully, he skinned the beast, preserving the pelt whole. When he was done, he draped the lion's skin over his shoulders like a cloak, the lion's head forming a hood over his own head. It was heavy, but it was also armor. The same armor that had turned aside every weapon. Now it would protect him. Heracles wore that lion skin for the rest of his life. It became his symbol, his signature. When people saw a man wearing the Nemean Lion's pelt, they knew that's Heracles, the hero who strangled the unstoppable beast. He returned to Tiryns, to Eurystheus, carrying the lion's massive body as proof. When Eurystheus saw him coming, saw the pelt, saw the body, the king went pale. Heracles had succeeded. The impossible first labor was complete. Eurystheus was so frightened by the sight that he had a large bronze jar made and partially buried in the ground. Whenever Heracles returned from a labor, Eurystheus would hide in that jar, shouting his commands from inside it, too afraid to face the hero directly. But for now, Eurystheus just stammered out the second labor. There's a Hydra in Lerna, a water serpent with many heads. Kill it, bring me proof. Heracles nodded. 1 labor down, 11 to go. He turned and walked away, the lion's skin on his shoulders, already thinking about the Hydra, already planning his next impossible task. Labor 2. The Lernaean Hydra learner was a marshland near Argos, a place of stagnant water and thick reeds, mist rising in the mornings, the air heavy and damp. In the center of the swamp, fed by an underwater spring, lived the Hydra. The Hydra was a serpent, but not like any normal snake. It had multiple heads, 9 of them most stories say, though some claim dozens. Each head had its own personality, its own venomous fangs, and the Hydra had a terrible defense. If you cut off one head, 2 more would grow in its place. Many heroes had tried to kill it. None had succeeded. The Hydra just grew more heads, more dangerous, more impossible to defeat. And its poison was incredibly potent. Even the creature's breath was toxic. Just being near it could kill a man. The swamp itself seemed wrong, corrupted by the Hydra's presence. Plants grew twisted and sickly. Animals avoided the area. The water was foul. This was a place of death and decay. Heracles didn't go alone this time. He brought with him his nephew Iolaus, son of his mortal twin brother Iphicles. Iolaus was young but brave, devoted to his uncle, eager to help however he could. They approached the swamp carefully, covering their mouths and noses against the toxic fumes. Heracles could see the Hydra's lair, a massive twisted tree growing out of the water, its roots forming a kind of cave where the creature dwelled. The Hydra wouldn't come out on its own. It was content to wait in its lair, ambushing anything that came close. So Heracles had to force it out. He took his arrows. He dipped them in pitch and set them on fire and shot them into the Hydra's den. The flames spread. Smoke filled the lair. And finally the Hydra emerged, hissing with 9 voices, angry and dangerous. It was enormous. Each head was as thick as a man's torso, serpentine, with fangs like daggers dripping venom. The body was massive, coiled and muscular, and in the center one head was different from the others, golden scales, eyes that burned with intelligence. That was the immortal head, the one that couldn't die. The Hydra struck at Heracles with multiple heads at once, attacking from different angles. Heracles swung his club, smashing one head then another. But where he'd destroyed a head, two new ones sprouted immediately, growing with horrible speed, ready to attack. This wasn't working. Every head he removed made the problem worse. The Hydra was growing, becoming more dangerous with each blow. Heracles retreated, thinking quickly. He called to Iolaus, "Fire." "I need fire." Iolaus understood immediately. He had been standing back, holding torches, watching the fight. Now he grabbed a burning branch and brought it forward. Heracles developed a new strategy. He would use his sword instead of his club, cut off a head cleanly. And immediately, before the stumps could regenerate, Iolaus would rush in with fire and cauterize the wound, searing it closed, preventing new heads from growing. Cut and burn. Cut and burn. They worked together, uncle and nephew, in perfect coordination. Heracles would grapple with the Hydra, hold it steady, slice off a head. Iolaus would dart in with his torch, sear the stump. The Hydra thrashed and struck, venom spraying, toxic breath burning their lungs. But they kept going, one head down, cauterized. 2 heads, 3, 4. But then Hera, watching from Olympus, sent help to the Hydra. A giant crab emerged from the swamp, massive claws snapping. It attacked Heracles from behind, trying to grab his legs to hold him in place for the Hydra to kill. Heracles, fighting on 2 fronts now, managed to stomp on the crab, crushing it beneath his heel. He killed it without even looking, focused entirely on the Hydra. Later, Hera would place that crab in the sky as the constellation Cancer, honor for its attempt to stop Heracles. So even though it failed, 5 heads, 6, 7, 8, finally, only 1 head remained, the immortal head, the golden one that couldn't die. Heracles gripped it, wrestled it down, and with one massive swing of his sword severed it from the body. The immortal head couldn't be killed, couldn't be burned. It thrashed on the ground, still alive, still dangerous. So Heracles did the only thing he could. He picked up an enormous boulder and buried the head beneath it, trapping it there forever. The head still lives beneath that stone, some say, immortal and angry, waiting. The Hydra's body lay dead in the swamp, finally defeated. Heracles and Iolaus stood over it, exhausted, burned, cut in places by the Hydra's fangs and claws. But Heracles had one more task. The Hydra's venom was incredibly potent, the most deadly poison in the world. He collected some of it in a jar carefully, knowing it might be useful. He dipped his arrows in the venom, coating them. From that day forward, Heracles' arrows were unstoppable. Even the smallest scratch would kill, the poison working instantly. He returned to Eurystheus with proof of the Hydra's death, one of the heads preserved in a sack. The king, hiding in his bronze jar, shouted out his judgment. "This doesn't count. You had help. Iolaus assisted you, so this labor is invalid." Heracles said nothing. It was petty, this complaint. But he didn't argue. If Eurystheus wanted to add extra labors, so be it. Heracles would complete them all. The king, perhaps realizing he couldn't actually force Heracles to do more labors than agreed, grudgingly accepted it after all. But the pettiness had been noted. This was what Heracles was dealing with, a small man, looking for any excuse to diminish the hero's achievements. Eurystheus gave the 3rd labor. There is a deer, sacred to Artemis, with golden antlers and bronze hooves. It lives in the hills of Ceryneian. Capture it, bring it to me alive. Don't harm it. Artemis would be angry. Just capture it and bring it here. He smiled as he said it. This task seemed impossible in a different way. Heracles was strong, yes, but the Ceryneian hind was fast, the fastest creature alive. And it was sacred. If he killed it, even by accident, he'd face the wrath of Artemis herself. Heracles accepted the labor. 2 down, 10 to go, though it felt like more. With Eurystheus's games and complaints, he set out for Ceryneian, wondering how exactly one captures something that cannot be caught. Labor 3, the Ceryneian hind. The Ceryneian hind was sacred to Artemis, goddess of the hunt. It was a deer, a female deer, though unusually. It had antlers made of pure gold. Its hooves were bronze, and it could run faster than any arrow, faster than the wind itself. Artemis had captured 4 such deer once to pull her chariot. But one had escaped, fleeing to the hills of Ceryneian in Arcadia. It lived there still, untouchable, running free through the forests, beautiful and wild. Heracles couldn't kill it. That would be sacrilege, an offense to Artemis. And he couldn't hurt it. Even a small wound might anger the goddess. He had to capture it alive and unharmed. But how do you capture something that's faster than you? Faster than anything? Other hunters had tried over the years. They'd set traps. The hind leaped over them. They'd tried to surround it. It was too fast, always finding a gap. They'd tried to shoot it with special arrows designed to entangle rather than harm. The hind dodged every shot. Heracles studied the problem. Strength wouldn't help here. Neither would weapons. This labor required something different: patience, endurance, persistence. So he decided, if he couldn't outrun the hind, he would simply never stop chasing it. He would pursue it day and night, never resting, never giving up, until eventually it had to tire. Everything tires eventually. Even the Ceryneian Hind. He tracked it to the forests of Artemis, found its trail, and began to run. The hind saw him coming and bolted, golden antlers flashing in the sunlight. It ran like the wind, like a shooting star, impossibly fast. Within moments it had disappeared into the distance, but Heracles kept running. Not as fast as the hind, but steadily, relentlessly. He followed its tracks, followed reports from shepherds and farmers who'd seen it pass. When he lost the trail, he searched until he found it again. Days passed, then weeks. The hind ran across all of Greece and beyond. Heracles followed, north into Thrace, east toward Scythia, back south through the mountains. The hind was testing him, perhaps, or simply running its usual paths, not yet understanding that this pursuer wouldn't give up. Months passed. A full year. Heracles ran through summer heat and winter cold. He ran through rain and sun and snow. He slept in snatches, just enough to keep going. He ate what he could catch, drank from streams. His only focus was the hind, always ahead, always just out of reach. The hind was faster, but Heracles was tireless. Gods had divine strength, and Heracles had inherited enough of it that he didn't tire like mortal men. He could keep going essentially forever, as long as his will held, and his will was iron. This was his labor. This was his penance. He would not fail. Finally, after a full year of pursuit, the hind began to slow. Not much, but noticeably. It was tired. Even this magical, sacred creature had limits. Heracles pressed harder. The gap between them closed. They were in the far north now, in the land of the Hyperboreans, that legendary place beyond the north wind, where the sun shone warmly even in winter. The hind, exhausted, tried to cross a river, the river Ladon, sacred waters. As it leaped, Heracles made his move. He shot a single arrow, carefully aimed, threading it between bone and sinew on the hind's front legs. The arrow pinned the legs together without drawing blood, without causing true injury. The hind stumbled, fell, couldn't run. Heracles was on it immediately, gently removing the arrow, holding the creature carefully. It struggled briefly, then went still, sides heaving, finally resigned to capture. Heracles had done it. A year of pursuit, but he'd captured the Ceryneian hind alive and unharmed. He lifted the deer carefully onto his shoulders, even exhausted. It was strong and began the long journey back to Tiryns, but as he walked through a forest, a figure appeared before him, blocking his path. A young woman with a silver bow, a quiver of arrows, a pack of hunting dogs at her feet. Artemis. The goddess looked at him with cold anger. "You dare," she said. "You dare to capture my sacred hind? You dare to lay hands on what belongs to me." Heracles carefully knelt, still holding the deer. "Great Artemis," he said, "I mean no disrespect. I am under a geas, a sacred obligation. King Eurystheus has demanded I bring him this hind. I have pursued it for a year without harming it. I will deliver it to the king and then release it immediately. It will return to your forests unharmed. I swear this." Artemis studied him, her expression unreadable. She could kill him right now if she chose. She was a goddess. He was just a hero, no matter how strong. But she must have seen something in him. Perhaps sincerity, perhaps the weight of his guilt and his need for redemption. She stepped aside. "You may take the hind to Eurystheus," she said, "but it must be released the moment he sees it. If any harm comes to this creature, Heracles, I will know, and I will find you." "I understand," Heracles said. "Thank you, goddess." He rose and continued toward Tiryns, the hind on his shoulders, Artemis's eyes on his back. When he arrived at the palace, Eurystheus was waiting, outside his bronze jar this time, curious to see if Heracles had actually succeeded. The king's eyes widened when he saw the golden antlers, the bronze hooves, the legendary hind alive and well. "I brought it," Heracles said. "As you commanded." Eurystheus reached for the deer, wanting to touch it, to claim it somehow. But Heracles stepped back. "Artemis said I must release it immediately," he said. "So I will." And before Eurystheus could argue, Heracles set the hind down gently and stepped back. The deer, free again, shook itself, looked at Heracles once with its dark eyes. Was that gratitude, respect? And then bolted, running back toward the forests, back to freedom. Eurystheus sputtered with anger. "You were supposed to bring it to me." "I wanted to keep it." "I brought it to you," Heracles said calmly. "You saw it. Labor complete. The hind is sacred to Artemis. You never could have kept it." Eurystheus glared at him but couldn't really argue. The labor was done. 3 down, 9 to go. "Fine," the king snapped. "Here's your next task. There's a boar on Mount Erymanthus. It's terrorizing the region, destroying farms. Capture it alive and bring it to me." He waved dismissively. "Go, and this time, actually bring me the creature." Heracles bowed his head, still playing the obedient servant, still walking his path of penance, and turned toward Erymanthus. 3 labors done. Each one different. Each one impossible in its own way. But each one completed. He was beginning to understand something. These labors weren't just about strength or courage. They were about finding the right approach, the right strategy. The lion required strength. The Hydra required teamwork and quick thinking. The hind required patience and persistence. Each labor taught him something. Changed him slightly. Made him not just stronger but wiser, more complete. 9 more labors to go. And Heracles was ready for them. Labor 4. The Erymanthian bore Mount Erymanthus rose in Arcadia, covered in thick forests of oak and pine. It was wild country, home to hunters and centaurs far from the civilized cities of Greece, and somewhere on those slopes lived a massive boar, a creature of incredible size and ferocity that had been terrorizing the region for months. This boar wasn't magical like the Nemean Lion, wasn't multiply-headed like the Hydra. It was just enormous and mean. Wild boars were dangerous under any circumstances. Their tusks could gore a man. Their charge could knock down trees. But this one was the size of a bull, with tusks like swords and a temperament like a thunderstorm. It had killed farmers, destroyed crops, attacked travelers. People were afraid to go into the forests. Heracles' task was to capture it alive. Eurystheus wanted to see it, wanted proof of its size and ferocity. On his way to Erymanthus, Heracles stopped to visit an old friend, Pholus, a centaur who lived in a cave on the mountain slopes. Centaurs were usually wild, violent creatures, half man, half horse, ruled by their appetites. But Pholus was different. He was civilized, kind, hospitable. He welcomed Heracles warmly, offering him food and shelter. They sat together in Pholus's cave, talking of old times, old adventures. Pholus roasted meat for his guest, and they ate together companionably. Then Heracles asked for wine. Pholus hesitated. There was wine, a large jar of it stored in the cave. But it belonged to all the centaurs collectively, not just to him. It was special wine, given to them by Dionysus himself. Opening it without the others' permission, Heracles insisted. "Just a cup," he said. "To honor our friendship," Pholus reluctantly agreed. He opened the jar. Immediately the rich scent of the wine filled the air, spreading out across the mountain. The other centaurs smelled it. And they were not like Pholus. They were wild, aggressive, territorial. They came thundering to the cave, angry that their wine was being opened, angry that a human was here drinking what was theirs. They attacked, dozens of centaurs armed with rocks and tree branches, charging the cave entrance. Heracles had to defend himself and Pholus. He used his bow, shooting arrows, the ones tipped with the Hydra's poison. Each arrow killed instantly. The centaurs fell one after another, the poison working too quickly for them to even understand what had happened. The surviving centaurs fled, scattering across the mountain. But the damage was done. Pholus, examining one of the fallen centaurs, a friend of his despite everything, pulled an arrow from the body, wondering how such a small wound could kill. The arrow slipped, scratched his hand. Just a scratch. Barely drew blood, but it was enough. The Hydra's poison worked instantly. Pholus collapsed, dead before Heracles could reach him. Heracles knelt beside his friend's body, grief washing over him. Another death. Another friend lost, this time by accident, by a scratch from his own weapon. The poison that made him so effective in battle had killed an innocent. He buried Pholus there on the mountain, built a cairn of stones to mark the grave. Another weight added to the burden he already carried. Another reminder of the cost of his strength, his power. But the labor still waited. The boar still needed to be captured. Heracles tracked it through the forests, following the destruction it left behind. Uprooted trees, torn earth, the remains of its kills. He found it in a dense thicket, massive and aggressive, its small eyes gleaming with rage. The boar charged as soon as it saw him. Heracles dodged barely. The creature was fast despite its size. It wheeled around, charged again. Heracles grabbed a tree trunk, using it as a shield. The boar's tusks drove into the wood, stuck briefly. Heracles dropped the tree and grabbed for the boar, but it pulled free and charged again. This wasn't working. The boar was too fast, too aggressive to grapple with safely. Heracles needed a different approach. He remembered. The mountain was high and it was winter. There was snow on the upper slopes, deep snow. Heracles began to retreat uphill, drawing the boar after him. The creature followed, enraged, determined to kill this human who'd invaded its territory. Up they went, higher and higher into the snow. The drifts grew deeper. The boar's short legs began to struggle, sinking into the snow. It slowed, laboring through the drifts, breath steaming in the cold air. Heracles, taller and stronger, moved more easily through the snow. Finally, the boar became stuck, trapped in a deep drift, unable to move forward or back. It squealed with rage, thrashing, but the snow held it. Heracles approached carefully. The boar snapped at him with its tusks, tried to gore him, but it couldn't maneuver. Heracles got ropes around its legs, bound it securely. Then he lifted the massive creature, must have weighed as much as 3 normal boars, and slung it over his shoulders. He carried it down the mountain, all the way back to Tiryns. The journey took days. The boar never stopped struggling, never stopped squealing. But Heracles held it firmly, enduring. When he arrived at the palace, Eurystheus saw him coming with the enormous boar and panicked. He dove into his bronze jar, hiding, shouting from inside, "Take it away! Take it away! I've seen it, the labor is complete. Just get that monster away from me." Heracles set the boar down outside the jar, where Eurystheus could see it through the opening. The king whimpered. The boar, still bound, glared at him with its small, mean eyes. Finally, Eurystheus composed himself enough to shout the 5th labor, the stables of King Augean in Elis. They haven't been cleaned in 30 years. Clean them in a single day. It was meant to be humiliating. The great Heracles reduced to shoveling manure. Eurystheus was probably laughing inside his jar, but Heracles just nodded. He released the boar. It immediately charged off into the wilderness, probably to terrorize some other region, and set off for Elis. 4 labors down. 8 to go. And ahead waited what might be the most demeaning task yet. But Heracles was learning. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not anymore. Not on this path. Labor 5. The Augean stables King Augeas of Elis was wealthy beyond measure. He owned the largest herds of cattle in all of Greece. Some said 3,000 head. Others said even more. Divine cattle, blessed by the gods, never sick, always fertile, constantly multiplying. It was a blessing. But it came with a problem. Waste. The cattle lived in enormous stables and yards near the palace, and those stables hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. 30 years of 3,000 cattle producing waste, every single day. The accumulation was staggering, layers upon layers of manure piled so deep that the cattle waded through it. The smell was overwhelming, visible from a distance as a shimmering haze. Flies swarmed in clouds. The ground was contaminated. It was a disaster. Augean had given up on cleaning it. No amount of workers could make a dent in the problem. It would take years, maybe decades, to shovel all that waste by hand, so he'd simply accepted it as a permanent condition. When Heracles arrived and announced he'd been sent to clean the stables, Augean laughed. "In one day? Impossible. It can't be done." Heracles studied the problem. The king was right. It couldn't be done by normal means. No amount of shoveling would clear this much waste in a single day. He needed a different approach. He walked the land around the stables thinking, and he noticed something. 2 rivers ran nearby, the Alpheus and the Peneus, both strong and fast-flowing. They ran parallel to the stables, one on each side, but not through them. What if they did run through the stables? Heracles made an offer to Augean. "I'll clean your stables in a single day. In exchange, give me 1/10 of your cattle." Augean agreed immediately, certain it was impossible. He even called his son to witness the agreement, making it official. 1 day to clean the stables completely, and Heracles would earn 300 head of cattle. Heracles set to work. But he didn't pick up a shovel. Instead, he went to the rivers. First, he breached the banks of the Alpheus, creating a channel that diverted the river toward the stables. Then he did the same with the Peneus on the other side. He dug channels, moved rocks, directed the flow, and then he opened both channels fully. The rivers roared into the stables like twin floods. The water was powerful, relentless, carrying everything before it. It swept through the stables and yards, washing away 30 years of accumulated waste in a single massive surge. The manure was carried away downstream, flushed out completely. Heracles guided the flood carefully, making sure it reached every corner, every building, every yard. The water scoured the floors, the walls, the ground itself. When it finally drained away, Heracles had created exit channels to carry the water back to the rivers downstream. The stables were clean. Spotlessly clean. The stones were visible. The air was clear, all in a single day, just as he'd promised. Augean was stunned. He couldn't believe it. The impossible task was done. But when Heracles came to claim his payment, 1/10 of the cattle, the king refused. "You didn't clean the stables," Augean said. "The rivers did. You just diverted water. That's not labor, that's a trick. I owe you nothing." His son, who'd witnessed the agreement, protested, "Father, you made a deal. Heracles completed the task you said was impossible. You owe him." But Augean was greedy, unwilling to part with 300 cattle. He banished his own son for disagreeing with him, and he banished Heracles too. "Get out of my kingdom. You'll get nothing from me." Heracles left without the cattle. He was angry. This was injustice, a broken oath. But he was also there to serve penance, not to enrich himself. The labor was done whether Augean acknowledged it or not. He returned to Tiryns and reported to Eurystheus. But the king, hearing how Heracles had completed the task, declared, "This doesn't count either. You used the rivers, you expected payment. This wasn't a proper labor." "It's invalid." Heracles' jaw tightened. 2 labors now that Eurystheus was trying to invalidate. The Hydra, because he'd had help. The stables, because he'd used cleverness instead of just physical labor. It was becoming clear. Eurystheus would look for any excuse to discount his work, to extend the servitude, to keep Heracles under his control as long as possible. But Heracles didn't argue, didn't fight. He just waited for the 6th labor. Eurystheus, emboldened by getting away with his previous invalidations, gave the next task. There are birds at Lake Stymphalian. Man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers. They can launch like arrows. Drive them away or kill them. I don't care which. Just deal with them. Heracles bowed and left. 5 labors officially done, though Eurystheus might claim only 3 counted. It didn't matter. Heracles would complete them all, and more if needed. This path of penance had no shortcuts, no easy outs. Lake Stymphalian waited, and so did the birds. Labor 6. The Stymphalian birds' Lake Stymphalian was in Arcadia, a mountain lake surrounded by dense swamps and forests. It had once been a peaceful place, but not anymore. The birds had come, And they'd made it a nightmare. These weren't normal birds. They were sacred to Ares, god of war, and they were weapons as much as creatures. Their beaks were bronze, sharp enough to pierce armor. Their feathers were metal, iron, or bronze, and they could launch them like arrows, shooting them at prey or threats. And they were carnivorous. They'd learned to hunt humans. Travelers who came near the lake were attacked. The birds would swarm, dozens or hundreds of them, darkening the sky. They'd rain metal feathers down like a storm of arrows. Anyone hit would fall, wounded or dead. Then the birds would descend to feed. The swamp around the lake made it difficult to approach. The ground was soft, treacherous. A person could sink, get stuck in the mud. And while you were struggling, the birds would attack. It was nearly impossible to fight them in their territory. Heracles stood at the edge of the swamp, studying the problem. The birds roosted in the trees on an island in the middle of the lake. There were so many of them that their weight had killed some of the trees. He could see their shapes, hundreds of them, metal glinting in the sunlight. How do you fight birds? Especially birds that can attack from range, that can fly away if you approach, that have the advantage of numbers and mobility. As Heracles was thinking, a figure appeared beside him, Athena, goddess of wisdom. She often helped heroes she favored, and she had a soft spot for Heracles, despite his father's infidelities that angered her rival Hera. She handed him a pair of bronze castanets, noise-makers, created by Hephaestus, the divine craftsman. "Use these," she said. "The birds are easily frightened by loud, strange sounds. Make noise, drive them into the air, then shoot them while they're flying." Heracles thanked her. It was a good plan, simple but effective. He climbed a nearby hill that overlooked the lake. Then he clashed the castanets together. The sound was incredible, a sharp metallic clashing that echoed across the water and through the swamp. It was jarring, unnatural, impossible to ignore. The birds, startled, took flight, all of them at once, a massive flock rising from the trees, filling the sky with their bronze wings. Heracles was ready. He had his bow, his arrows tipped with Hydra venom. He began to shoot, fast and accurate. Each arrow found a target. Each bird that was hit fell immediately, the poison working instantly. He shot and shot, barely pausing, his arrows whistling through the air. Some of the birds tried to attack him, launching their metal feathers. Heracles ducked behind his shield, the Nemean Lion's hide, and the feathers bounced off harmlessly. Then he'd emerge and shoot again. The birds realized they couldn't win this fight. They began to flee, not just flying around the lake, but leaving entirely, heading north toward the Black Sea. Heracles let them go. His task was to drive them from Stymphalian, not to hunt them to extinction. Within an hour the sky was clear. The lake was quiet. Bodies of fallen birds littered the shore. The ones that survived were gone, wouldn't return. The people of the region were safe again. Heracles collected some of the birds as proof. Their bronze beaks and iron feathers would convince Eurystheus. Then he made his way back to Tiryns. This time Eurystheus couldn't find a reason to invalidate the labor. Heracles had been alone, had used his own skills, had completed the task exactly as requested. 6 labors done, though if you counted the invalidated ones, it was really 8 tasks he'd completed. The king, frustrated, gave the 7th labor Crete. "There's a bull there, a divine bull that Poseidon sent. It's gone mad, terrorizing the island. King Minos can't control it. Capture it and bring it here." Heracles accepted without comment. 6 down officially, probably 8 or 9 more to go given Eurystheus's games. But he was past halfway in the original count. Making progress, 1 labor at a time. He headed for the coast to find a ship to Crete, wondering what awaited him on the island, and what kind of bull could terrorize an entire kingdom. Labor 7. The Cretan bull Heracles sailed to Crete, that great island in the southern sea, home of King Minos and the legendary labyrinth. Crete was a powerful kingdom, wealthy and sophisticated, with grand palaces and a mighty navy. But even Crete had problems it couldn't solve. The bull was one of them. Years earlier, King Minos had prayed to Poseidon for a sign of divine favor, a confirmation of his right to rule. Poseidon had answered by sending a magnificent bull from the sea, white as foam, powerful and beautiful. The understanding was that Minos would sacrifice this bull back to Poseidon as thanks. But Minos, seeing how perfect the bull was, decided to keep it. He sacrificed a different bull instead, hoping Poseidon wouldn't notice or care. Poseidon noticed, and Poseidon cared. As punishment, the sea god drove the bull mad. It escaped from Minos's herds and began rampaging across Crete. It destroyed crops, knocked down walls, attacked anyone who came near it. It breathed fire, or so the stories said, though perhaps that was just the steam from its nostrils in the morning cold. Exaggerated by frightened witnesses. Worse, Poseidon made Minos's wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. From that union, don't ask how, it's too strange to dwell on, came the Minotaur, the bull-headed monster that Minos would eventually trap in the labyrinth. But that's another story. For now, the bull itself was the problem. It roamed wild and no one could stop it. When Heracles arrived and announced he'd come for the bull, Minos was almost relieved. "Take it," he said, "please, it's been nothing but trouble. If you can catch it, it's yours." Heracles tracked the bull across the island. It wasn't hard to follow. Destroyed olive groves, broken fences, frightened villagers pointing in the direction it had gone. He found it in a valley, pawing the ground, snorting, eyes rolling with madness. The bull saw him and charged immediately. This was what it did now. Attack anything that moved, anything that might be a threat. Heracles didn't run. He'd wrestled the Nemean Lion. He'd strangled serpents as an infant. No bull, even a divine bull, was something he understood. He waited until the last moment, then sidestepped. As the bull thundered past, he grabbed its horns. The bull tried to shake him off, thrashing its head, incredible strength in its neck. But Heracles held on. He planted his feet, muscles straining, and began to force the bull's head down. It was a contest of pure strength. The bull's divine power against Heracles' divine heritage. They struggled, neither giving ground, dust rising around them. Slowly, gradually, Heracles forced the bull down. Its front knees buckled. Its head touched the earth. Heracles kept the pressure on until the bull, exhausted, went still, defeated. He didn't harm it. Didn't kill it. Just dominated it completely, showed it who was stronger. Then he released the pressure slightly, keeping control but not forcing submission. The bull, its madness fading now that it had been conquered, calmed. Heracles fashioned a rope halter and led the bull like a pet. It followed docilely, all its rage spent. They walked to the shore, and Heracles, showing strength that amazed the watching Cretans, carried the bull into the sea and swam with it back to the Greek mainland, keeping its head above water, guiding it across the waves. When he arrived back at Tiryns, dripping wet, leading a divine bull, Eurystheus took one look and dove into his jar again. "Show me from a distance!" he shouted. Heracles paraded the bull past the jar's opening. "Labor complete," he said. Eurystheus, still hiding, declared the labor valid. He couldn't find an excuse to invalidate this one. Then he shouted, "Release it! I don't want it here." Heracles let the bull go. It wandered off toward Marathon, where years later it would cause more trouble until Theseus finally killed it. But that wasn't Heracles' concern anymore. His labor was done, 7 down. And now Eurystheus, perhaps running out of nearby monsters, gave an 8th labor that would take Heracles far from Greece. In Thrace, King Diomedes keeps man-eating horses, 4 mares that feed on human flesh. Bring them to me, Thrace, the wild north. Heracles would need to travel far, into lands less civilized than Greece, where the rules were different and the dangers greater. But he nodded, as always, and set out. 1 foot in front of the other. 1 labor at a time. Labor 8. The mares of Diomedes' Thrace was a hard land. Cold winters, hot summers, rocky soil. The people there were warriors, raiders, less refined than the Greeks. They followed different customs, worshipped the gods differently, settled disputes with blood more often than words. King Diomedes ruled a portion of Thrace from his fortress near the coast. He was infamous even by Thracian standards. He was cruel, violent, and he had a terrible habit. He fed his enemies to his horses. The 4 mares, Podargos, Lampon, Xanthos, and Dinos, were kept in bronze stables, chained with iron chains because they were so vicious. They were beautiful horses, powerful and fast, but they'd been fed human flesh for so long that they'd developed a taste for it. They were more like beasts than horses. They'd bite, kick, attack anyone who came near. Diomedes would capture travelers, prisoners from raids, anyone who offended him. He'd throw them to the mares. The horses would tear them apart and devour them. It was murder, but also a kind of sacrifice. Diomedes claimed it made the horses stronger, faster, more perfect. Heracles arrived in Thrace with a few companions, young men who'd volunteered to follow him, seeking adventure and glory. One of them was Abderus, a youth who Heracles had grown fond of, almost like a son. They came to Diomedes' fortress at night. Heracles didn't announce himself, didn't ask permission. This wasn't that kind of labor. Diomedes was a tyrant, a murderer. Heracles had no respect for him. They broke into the stables. The horses immediately attacked, teeth bared, trying to bite and kick. But Heracles was ready. He struck them, not to harm them permanently, just to stun them, to show dominance. One by one he subdued the mares, bound them, prepared them for transport. But the commotion woke Diomedes and his guards. They came running, armed and angry. "How dare you steal my horses?" Diomedes shouted. Heracles turned to face him. "These horses are fed on murder," he said. "That ends now," Diomedes laughed. "You think you can take them? You think you can take anything from me?" His guards surrounded Heracles and his companions, weapons drawn. A fight broke out. Heracles fought like the hero he was. Overwhelming strength, perfect technique, no hesitation. He cut through the guards, moving toward Diomedes himself. The king, seeing his guards fall, turned to run. But Heracles was faster. He caught Diomedes, lifted him, the king screaming, begging, and carried him to the bronze stables. And then Heracles did something terrible. Something that would haunt him, even though the king deserved it. He threw Diomedes to his own horses. The mares, recognizing their master's scent but driven by their conditioned hunger, attacked. Diomedes' screams didn't last long. The horses consumed him. The man who'd fed them so many innocents meeting the same fate he'd inflicted on others. It was justice. But it was also dark, brutal justice. Heracles watched it happen, his face grim. This was what these labors sometimes required. Not heroism, but hard choices, dark deeds. After Diomedes died, something strange happened. The horses calmed. They stopped struggling, stopped trying to attack. It was as if consuming their cruel master had broken whatever madness he'd instilled in them. They stood quietly, waiting to be led. Heracles gathered the horses and his companions. It was time to leave this place, but as they prepared to depart, he realized someone was missing, Abderus. The young man had been guarding the horses while Heracles fought. He should be here. Heracles found him near the stables, dead. The horses had broken free briefly during the fighting, and Abderus, trying to control them alone, had been killed. Trampled or bitten or both, it didn't matter. He was gone, another friend dead, another casualty of these labors. Heracles knelt beside the body, grief and guilt washing over him. Abderus had followed him seeking glory, seeking to be part of something great, and he'd found only death. Heracles buried him with honor, built a tomb and founded a city nearby called Abdera in his memory. It was the only thing he could do, the only way to ensure the young man wasn't forgotten. Then, with a heavy heart, Heracles led the 4 mares back to Greece. They followed docilely now, their madness gone, just horses again, though they'd always carry the stain of what they'd been. When he presented them to Eurystheus, the king was both pleased and nervous. He didn't want to keep them too dangerous, even calmed. Eventually he released them into the wild. Some said they ran to Mount Olympus, where Zeus's own mares ran free. Others said they died of old age in the forests of Arcadia. 8 labors done. 4 more, or more given the invalidations to go. Eurystheus gave the 9th labor, and it was ambitious. The Amazons, the warrior women who live beyond the Black Sea, are ruled by Queen Hippolyta. She has a belt, a gift from Ares himself, symbol of her authority. My daughter wants it. Bring me Hippolyta's belt. This labor would take Heracles farther than he'd ever gone, beyond Greece, beyond Thrace, to the very edge of the known world where the Amazons ruled their kingdom of women warriors. It would also prove to be one of the most tragic labors, not because of monsters or impossible challenges, but because of misunderstanding, manipulation, and unnecessary death. Heracles gathered companions for this journey. It was far too dangerous to go alone. Among them were some of the greatest heroes of Greece: Theseus, who would become king of Athens; Telamon, who would father the hero Ajax, and others seeking glory and adventure. They built a ship and set sail, heading east toward the land of the Amazons. Labor 9, the belt of Hippolyta. The Amazons lived on the southern shores of the Black Sea, in a land of steppes and forests. They were warriors, trained from childhood to fight, to ride, to use bow and spear and sword. They were said to be daughters of Ares himself, though that was probably metaphor. What was true was that they were formidable, independent and ruled entirely by women. The Amazons had their own kingdom, their own customs. Men were allowed only for reproduction, and even then only temporarily. Male children were sent away or killed. The stories varied. Female children were raised as warriors, taught that strength and independence were the highest virtues. Queen Hippolyta ruled the Amazons from her capital city. She was fierce, beautiful, an extraordinary warrior. She wore a golden belt, a gift from Ares, god of war, that symbolized her authority as queen. It was magical, some said, granting her power and command over her warriors. When Heracles and his companions arrived, sailing into the harbor, the Amazons were immediately on alert. Ships from Greece rarely came this far. The women gathered on the shore armed and ready, watching to see what these men wanted. Heracles came ashore alone, hands open, showing he meant no immediate threat. He asked to speak with Queen Hippolyta. She came, surrounded by her guards. She was everything the stories said: tall, strong, beautiful, with the bearing of someone who'd never doubted her own power. She wore the golden belt around her waist, gleaming in the sunlight. Heracles bowed respectfully. "Great Queen," he said, "I am Heracles of Thebes. I've been sent by King Eurystheus to request your belt. I don't wish to take it by force. I'm asking one warrior to another. If you would give it to me, it was honest, direct." Heracles had learned through these labors that sometimes the straightforward approach was best. Hippolyta studied him. She'd heard of Heracles, who hadn't? The man who'd killed the Nemean Lion, the Hydra, who'd completed impossible tasks. He was famous even here at the edge of the world, and she saw something in him. The burden he carried, the grief in his eyes. This wasn't a man seeking conquest or glory. This was a man serving penance, trying to atone for something. After a long moment she spoke. "I will give you the belt." "You've come honorably," asked respectfully. "I see no reason to refuse." It was that simple. No battle, no challenge. Just one warrior recognizing another's purpose and choosing to help. But Hera was watching. She always watched Heracles. And she couldn't allow him to succeed so easily. The goddess descended to the Amazon camp, disguised as one of their warriors. She spread rumors, whispered poison. "These Greek men aren't here for a belt. They're here to kidnap the queen. Look at them, armed and ready. They're planning to attack, to take Hippolyta by force." The Amazons, hearing this, grew alarmed. They looked at the Greek ships, at the warriors on board. They saw weapons, saw men preparing for something. Without context, it looked threatening. They armed themselves. They surrounded Heracles and his companions. And they attacked. Heracles, confused, tried to explain, tried to tell them this was a misunderstanding. But in the chaos, in the noise, his words were lost. The Amazons thought he'd betrayed the truce, thought he'd been stalling while his men prepared an assault. Hippolyta tried to stop it, tried to call off her warriors, but she was surrounded, couldn't make herself heard over the battle. Heracles, defending himself and his companions, fought back. He didn't want to. These women had done nothing to deserve his violence, but they were attacking and he had to protect his men. In the chaos, Hippolyta fell. Some stories say Heracles killed her accidentally, thinking she was attacking him. Others say another hero, Telamon or Theseus, struck her down in the confusion. Still others say she survived but was grievously wounded. Either way, the queen was down. The belt fell from her waist. And Heracles, seeing it there, seeing the battle raging around him, seeing everything going wrong, grabbed it and shouted to his companions, "To the ships!" Now they fled. The Greeks ran for their ships. fighting through the Amazons, taking casualties but making it aboard. They pushed off from shore, rowing desperately while Amazon arrows rained down on them. Heracles stood at the stern, holding the belt, watching the shore recede. He'd gotten what he came for. But the price was too high, Hippolyta dead or wounded because of Hera's manipulation. Amazon warriors dead because of a misunderstanding. Another labor completed, another trail of bodies left behind, he'd asked honorably. She'd agreed peacefully. And somehow it had still ended in violence and death. Heracles was beginning to understand that Hera would never let him have peace, would never let any labor be simple or clean. The journey back to Greece was somber. The men who'd come seeking glory had found only hard fighting and questionable victory. They'd defeated the Amazons, yes, but they'd also betrayed a truce, or seemed to, and killed women who'd done nothing wrong except defend their queen from perceived threat. When Heracles presented the belt to Eurystheus, the king barely looked at it. He gave it to his daughter, who wore it as a trophy, never knowing what it had cost, how many had died for her to have this golden ornament. 9 labors done, 3 to go, or 5 if the invalidation stood. Eurystheus gave the 10th labor, and his voice held satisfaction. He thought perhaps that this one would finally break Heracles. On the island of Erythea, at the western edge of the world, the giant Geryon keeps a herd of red cattle. Bring me those cattle, all of them. Drive them from the end of the world to here. It was the longest journey yet, the most difficult. Across lands unknown, facing dangers uncounted, all while herding cattle. But Heracles just nodded as he always did, tied the belt to his waist as a reminder of its cost, and prepared for the longest journey of his labors 9 down. The end was in sight, but the hardest trials still lay ahead. Labor 10, the cattle of Geryon. The island of Erythea lay at the western edge of the world, beyond the pillars of Heracles, those great rocks that marked where the Mediterranean ended and the vast ocean began. To reach it, Heracles would have to travel farther than almost any Greek had ever gone. The journey itself took months. Heracles traveled west across Greece through Italy, along the northern coast of the Mediterranean, through what would later be called Gaul and Hispania. He passed through lands where people had never heard of Greece, where the gods had different names, where everything was strange and new. The sun beat down relentlessly. It grew hotter as he traveled west, until Heracles, frustrated, shot an arrow at the sun itself, at Helios, the sun god, in his chariot crossing the sky. It was a moment of rage, of exhaustion, of being tired of always suffering under the god's whims. Helios, rather than being offended, was amused. He admired Heracles' boldness. As a gift, he lent Heracles the golden cup he used each night to sail back from west to east across the ocean. In this cup, Heracles could sail to Erythea. Heracles climbed into the golden cup, barely large enough for a god, cramped for a man of his size, and sailed west. The ocean was vast, endless, terrifying. Waves like mountains rose and fell. Strange creatures swam beneath the surface, but the golden cup was divine, blessed. It carried him safely. Finally, he reached Erythea. The island was rocky, windswept, at the very edge of everything. And there, grazing in fields near the shore, were the cattle of Geryon, beautiful red cattle, sacred, glowing almost with inner light. Geryon himself was a giant. Not just large, actually a giant, son of Chrysa, grandson of Medusa. And he was strange. He had 3 bodies, 3 heads, 6 arms, 6 legs, all joined at the waist. 3 warriors in one, able to fight in multiple directions at once, coordinating perfectly, because they shared one mind. He also had help. A herdsman named Eurytion guarded the cattle, and with him was Orthrus, a 2-headed dog, brother to Cerberus, vicious and loyal. Heracles approached at dawn. Orthrus detected him immediately, both heads barking in different tones. The dog charged, and Heracles met it with his club. 1 swing and Orthrus fell dead. 2 heads were nothing compared to the Hydra's 9. Eurytion came running, shouting. Heracles didn't want to kill him, just a herdsman doing his job. But the man attacked with his spear. Heracles defended himself. Eurytion fell, Now Geryon himself came, all three bodies moving in perfect coordination. 3 shields raised, 3 spears ready. He was terrifying, a living embodiment of overwhelming force. They fought on the rocky shore, waves crashing behind them. Geryon attacked from multiple angles, his 3 bodies surrounding Heracles, coordinating their strikes. Heracles had to defend on all sides, spinning, blocking, striking back. But Heracles had fought the Nemean Lion, had wrestled the Cretan bull, had faced creatures that seemed impossible to defeat. 3 bodies just meant 3 targets. He grabbed one of his arrows, tipped with Hydra venom, and shot. The arrow passed through all 3 of Geryon's bodies in a single shot, the poison working instantly. The giant fell, all 3 bodies dying at once, collapsing onto the rocks. Heracles stood over him, breathing hard. Another monster dead, another labor nearly complete. But now came the hard part, getting the cattle home. He rounded them up, all of them, and began the long drive back across the known world. The journey back took even longer than the journey there. He had to move at the cattle's pace, through lands where people tried to steal them, where monsters attacked, where terrain was difficult. He crossed back into Hispania, through Gaul, over the Alps into Italy. In Italy, a giant named Cacus stole some of the cattle while Heracles slept. Heracles tracked the thief to his cave. Cacus had dragged the cattle backward so their tracks pointed the wrong way, clever, but Heracles heard them lowing inside the cave. He tore the mountain apart, literally ripped the rock away, and killed Cacus, recovering his cattle. He continued through Italy, around the coast, into Greece. The journey took over a year. A full year of herding divine cattle across the ancient world, facing bandits and monsters and natural obstacles, never stopping, never giving up. When he finally reached Tiryns, driving the red cattle before him, Eurystheus took one look at them and sacrificed them all to Hera, every single one, slaughtered as an offering to the goddess who hated Heracles. It was cruel, spiteful, all that work, all that distance, all that time, and the cattle were just killed to honor his enemy. But Heracles showed no reaction. He'd known probably that this would be the outcome. The labors weren't really about the objects or the monsters. They were about the penance, the journey, the transformation of himself through suffering and perseverance. 10 labors done. 2 more to go, though with the invalidations maybe 4 more. Eurystheus was running out of impossible tasks. The 11th labor would take him even farther than Erythea, to a garden at the world's end, where a tree bore golden apples and was guarded by an immortal dragon. "Go to the garden of the Hesperides," Eurystheus commanded. "Bring me the golden apples that grow there." He smiled as he said it, because everyone knew. No mortal had ever found the garden of the Hesperides, and those who claimed to know where it was wouldn't say. This labor might be the one Heracles couldn't complete, but Heracles just bowed his head, accepted the task, and began to plan. If the garden could be found, he would find it. If the apples could be taken, he would take them. 11 labors down. 1 or 2 more after this. The end was coming. He could feel it. Labor 11. The apples of the Hesperides. The garden of the Hesperides was a mythical place. It lay at the western edge of the world. Some said near where Erythea had been, others said farther, beyond even that. It was the garden of the gods, where Gaia had given Hera a wedding gift, a tree that bore golden apples, apples of immortality. The tree was guarded by the Hesperides, nymphs, daughters of the evening, who sang and tended the garden, and coiled around the tree was Ladon, a dragon that never slept, with 100 heads, watching in all directions at once. No one knew exactly where the garden was. Its location was a secret, hidden from mortals. Heracles would have to find it first before he could even attempt to take the apples. He began by seeking information. He traveled to the river where the nymphs gathered and asked them. They didn't. But they told him. Ask Nereus, the old man of the sea. He knows everything about the ocean and the lands beyond. Heracles found Nereus sleeping on a beach. The old sea god could change shape, could become water or fire or any creature. Heracles grabbed him and held on, while Nereus transformed again and again. Snake, lion, fire, water. But Heracles had wrestled too many shape-changing creatures to be fooled. He held on until Nereus gave up and agreed to answer. "The garden lies beyond the land of the Hyperboreans," Nereus said, "where Atlas holds up the sky. He can tell you more. He can see the garden from where he stands. Atlas, the Titan who'd fought against Zeus in the Great War. As punishment, he'd been condemned to hold up the sky for eternity, standing at the western edge of the world, bearing that impossible weight on his shoulders. Heracles travelled to the far west, beyond all lands he'd ever known, to the very edge of the world, and there he found Atlas, an enormous figure bent under the weight of the heavens, muscles straining, condemned to this task forever. Atlas saw him coming. "Another visitor," he said, his voice tired. "Come to marvel at the Titan brought low." Heracles approached respectfully. "No," he said, "I need your help. I seek the golden apples of the Hesperides." Atlas laughed bitterly. "Everyone seeks those apples. They're nearby. I can see the garden from here. But I can't go to it. I'm bound to this task, and you can't get past Ladon. The dragon never sleeps, never stops watching. It's impossible." Heracles thought for a moment. Then he made an offer. "What if I held the sky for you? Just for a short time. You could go to the garden, get the apples, bring them back. Then you take the sky back, and I'll take the apples to Eurystheus." Atlas stared at him. "You would hold the sky? Do you understand what you're offering?" "The weight is unimaginable. It would crush any normal man." "I'm not a normal man," Heracles said. Atlas considered. The chance to be free, even briefly, after thousands of years of torment, it was tempting. "Very tempting. All right," he said. "But if you drop it, the sky falls and the world ends. Do you understand? You cannot fail." "I understand," Heracles said. Atlas showed him how to position himself, how to brace his legs, how to distribute the weight. Then carefully, Atlas transferred the burden of the heavens onto Heracles' shoulders. The weight was beyond description. It wasn't just heavy. It was the weight of everything above, the entire sky, the stars, the cosmic order itself. Heracles' legs nearly buckled. His shoulders screamed. Every muscle in his body strained to the breaking point, but he held it. Gritting his teeth, calling on every ounce of his divine strength, he held the sky. Atlas, free for the first time in millennia, stretched, rolled his shoulders, felt what it was like to stand without burden. It was glorious. Then he walked away toward the garden. Heracles couldn't see him go, couldn't turn his head, couldn't move at all without dropping the sky. He could only stand there, bearing the weight, trusting that Atlas would return. Time passed. Hours? Days? It was impossible to tell. Every moment was agony. The weight pressed down constantly, relentlessly. Heracles focused on breathing, on keeping his legs steady, on not thinking about how much it hurt. Finally, Atlas returned. He held 3 golden apples in his hands, glowing softly. "I got them," he said. "The Hesperides gave them to me willingly. I'm their father, after all, or uncle, depending on the genealogy. Ladon didn't stop me." "Good," Heracles gasped. "Now take the sky back." But Atlas hesitated. He looked at the apples, then at Heracles, straining under the sky's weight. Then he said, "You know what? I've been thinking. Why don't I take these apples to Eurystheus for you? You can just keep holding the sky. Forever. It's what I was condemned to anyway. You're doing fine." Heracles, through his pain, realized he'd been tricked. Atlas had no intention of taking the burden back. He was going to leave Heracles here, condemned to the same eternal punishment. But Heracles was clever too. He'd learned through these labors that strength alone wasn't always enough. Sometimes you needed cunning. "All right," he said, his voice strained. "But before you go, help me adjust the padding on my shoulders. I need to position it better, or I won't last." Atlas, not suspecting anything, set down the apples and came close. "All right, let me hold it for just a moment while you adjust." He took the sky back onto his own shoulders. The weight settled onto him, familiar and terrible, and Heracles immediately stepped back, grabbed the apples, and ran. "Wait!" Atlas shouted. We had an agreement, we had a trick, Heracles called back. And you tried to trick me first. I'm sorry, Atlas. Truly. But I can't stay here. My labors aren't finished. He ran, carrying the golden apples, leaving Atlas roaring behind him, once again condemned to hold the sky forever. It was cruel, perhaps, but it was necessary. And Atlas had tried to betray him first. In the world of gods and myths, trust was always conditional. Heracles returned to Greece with the 3 golden apples. He presented them to Eurystheus, who looked at them with wonder. Actual golden apples from the garden of the gods, something no one had ever brought back before. But Heracles knew the apples couldn't stay in mortal hands. They were too sacred, too powerful. After Eurystheus had seen them, Athena appeared and took them back to the garden. They belonged there. They'd always belonged there. 11 labors done. 1 more to go. And Eurystheus, perhaps realizing this was his last chance to send Heracles somewhere he couldn't return from, gave the final labor with a smile. Go to the underworld. Find Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guards the gates of Hades. Bring him to me. Bring me the guardian of the dead. It was the most impossible task yet. Not a monster to kill, but a god's own creature to capture. Not a journey to the edge of the world, but beyond it, to the world of the dead itself, a place where no living man was meant to go. A place where even heroes feared to tread, but Heracles had come this far. 11 labors completed. 1 more, and his penance would be done. 1 more, and he could finally be free of Eurystheus, free of this burden. He would go to the underworld. He would face Hades himself, and somehow he would bring back Cerberus. The final labor awaited. Labor 12, Cerberus, to enter the underworld you had to die. That was the normal way, but Heracles was very much alive, and he intended to stay that way. He traveled to Cape Taenarum at the southern tip of Greece, where there was said to be a cave that descended into the underworld. A back entrance, used by heroes and demigods when they needed to visit the land of the dead without dying first. Before he descended, Heracles sought initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries, the secret rites of Demeter and Persephone that taught initiates about death and rebirth. He needed every advantage, every protection he could get. The priests initiated him, taught him the prayers and passwords that might protect him below. Then he stood at the mouth of the cave, torch in hand, and began to descend. The passage wound down, deep into the earth. The air grew cold. The light from his torch seemed dimmer, as if the darkness here was thicker, harder to push back. He could hear water dripping, distant moaning sounds, lost souls perhaps, or just the wind in the deep places. Finally, the cave opened onto a vast space. The underworld. It was not like the world above. There was no sun, no sky, just a grey twilight that came from nowhere and everywhere. The river Styx flowed nearby, dark and silent. Shades, ghosts of the dead, drifted aimlessly, pale and insubstantial, barely aware of their surroundings. They saw Heracles, a living man in this land of the dead, and they fled in terror. Some reached for him, as if trying to remember what it was to be alive, but they couldn't touch him, couldn't affect him. He was still vital, still real in a way they no longer were. Heracles walked through the underworld, heading toward the palace of Hades. He passed the judgment seat where souls were sent to their eternal destinations. He passed the fields of asphodel, where ordinary souls wandered in endless grey nothing. He passed the entrance to Tartarus, where the worst sinners were punished forever, and then he came to the palace itself. Hades and Persephone sat on their thrones, the king and queen of the dead, ruling over this vast, silent kingdom. Hades stood as Heracles approached. A living man here in his realm, uninvited. It was unprecedented, outrageous even. But Hades knew who Heracles was, knew about the labors, and there was something about Heracles, the weight he carried, the grief that Hades understood. The god of the dead understood suffering. "Why are you here, Heracles?" Hades asked, his voice like stone grinding. Heracles knelt respectfully. "Lord Hades, Lady Persephone, I come on my final labor. King Eurystheus has sent me to bring back Cerberus. I ask your permission to attempt this." Hades almost laughed. "Cerberus, my guardian, my most loyal companion. You want to take him to the surface?" "Just temporarily," Heracles said. "I'll bring him back." "I swear it. I need only to show him to Eurystheus. Then Cerberus returns here to his post." Hades considered. Persephone whispered something to him, perhaps reminding him that Heracles was a hero deserving of respect. Or perhaps pointing out that refusing might lead to violence, and violence in the underworld could be complicated. Finally, Hades spoke. "Very well. You may take Cerberus, but only if you can subdue him without using weapons. No arrows, no sword, no club, just your strength and your courage. If you can overpower him with your bare hands, he's yours to borrow." Heracles stood. "Thank you, Lord Hades. Where is he?" "At the gates, where he always is, waiting, guarding." Heracles walked back through the underworld, past the rivers and the fields, to the great gates where the newly dead entered. And there, chained with adamantine chains that he could break at will, lay Cerberus. The three-headed dog was enormous. Each head was the size of a lion's, with teeth like daggers. His body was massive, muscular, powerful. His tail was a living serpent, hissing and snapping. More serpents grew from his back and neck, writing and striking. He was a creature designed to terrify, to stop anyone from entering or leaving. The three heads saw Heracles approach. They all began to growl, a sound like thunder, like avalanches, like the end of the world. Heracles stopped at the edge of the chain's reach. He set down his weapons, the club, the bow, the sword. He would do this as Hades demanded. No weapons, just himself. He stepped forward into range. Cerberus lunged, all three heads striking at once, the serpent tail whipping around, trying to bite him from behind. Heracles dodged barely and grabbed. He got his arms around Cerberus's neck, one of them, and held on. The dog thrashed wildly. The other two heads bit at Heracles, teeth scraping against the Nemean Lion skin he wore. The serpent struck again and again, some finding gaps in his protection, biting, injecting venom. The tail wrapped around his legs, trying to pull him down. But Heracles had wrestled the Nemean Lion, had subdued the Cretan bull, had held up the sky itself. He knew how to endure pain, how to keep fighting when everything hurt, how to not let go. He got his other arm around a second neck, squeezed both. The third head kept biting, the serpents kept striking, the tail kept constricting. But Heracles held on. He poured all his strength into the hold, cutting off air, applying pressure. Slowly Cerberus's struggles weakened. Not dying, God's creatures don't die easily, but submitting, acknowledging that this man was stronger, was dominant, was worthy. Finally Cerberus went limp. Heracles held the pressure for a moment longer, making sure, then released slightly. The three heads drooped. The serpent stopped striking. The tail unwrapped. Heracles had done it. He'd subdued Cerberus with his bare hands. He lifted the massive dog, must have weighed as much as the Cretan bull, and carried him toward the surface. Cerberus didn't resist, just let himself be carried, accepting this strange situation. The journey back up was harder than the descent. Cerberus was heavy, and the dog's presence affected the underworld. Shades fled, the darkness seemed deeper, the cold more intense. But Heracles climbed step by step, carrying his burden. He emerged from the cave at Taenarum into sunlight. Cerberus, seeing the sun for the first time, or at least the first time in countless ages, howled. All three heads threw back and howled at the light, at the warmth, at the impossible strangeness of the upper world. Heracles carried him all the way to Tiryns, to Eurystheus's palace. People fled before them, screaming, seeing this monster from the underworld walking through their streets. When Eurystheus saw Cerberus, he didn't just hide in his bronze jar. He went pale, nearly fainted. "That's enough!" he screamed. Take it back right now. The labor is complete. You've done it. Now get that monster out of my sight." Heracles bowed, still holding the dog. Then he turned and walked back all the way to Taenarum, back down into the underworld. He carried Cerberus to the gates and set him down gently. The three heads looked at him almost sadly. Then Cerberus returned to his post, lay down and resumed his eternal vigil, guarding the gates, letting no living soul enter, no dead soul leave. Heracles stood before Hades and Persephone once more. "It's done," he said. "Cerberus is returned as I promised." Hades nodded. "You have completed your labor, Heracles. You have walked through my realm, taken my guardian, and brought him back unharmed. You have my respect." Persephone smiled. "Go now, hero. Return to the sunlight. You don't belong here." "Not yet." Heracles bowed deeply and left the underworld. He climbed back up to the surface, emerging into daylight, breathing fresh air, alive and victorious. 12 labors, all complete. Despite Eurystheus's tricks, despite Hera's interference, despite every obstacle placed in his path, he had finished them all. When he returned to Tiryns and stood before Eurystheus, the king couldn't even look at him. "The labors are done," Eurystheus said quietly. "Your servitude is ended. You're free." Heracles stood there for a moment, hardly believing it. Free. After so many years, so much suffering, so many impossible tasks, it was finally over. He turned and walked away from Tiryns, from Eurystheus, from the bronze jar and the petty king and all of it. He walked away a free man, his penance complete, his debt paid. 12 labors, 12 lessons, 12 steps on the journey from guilt to redemption, from tragedy to triumph, from broken man to the greatest hero Greece had ever known. The labors were finished. But Heracles' story, that wasn't quite over yet. Heracles walked away from Tiryns a free man. The labors were done. His penance was complete. After years of servitude, years of impossible tasks, years of suffering and loss, he was finally his own master again. But freedom, he discovered, was complicated. He'd spent so long focused on the labors, on the next task, on simply surviving and completing what was demanded of him. Now, with no task ahead, no clear path to follow, he had to figure out what came next. He was still the strongest man alive. Still a hero, still famous throughout Greece. Stories of his labors had spread everywhere. The Nemean Lion, the Hydra, the journey to the Underworld. People knew his name, knew his deeds. He was honored, respected, even worshipped in some places as a demigod, but he was also still carrying his grief, the memory of Megara and his children, the friends lost during the labors, Pholus, Abderus, and others, the weight of all the violence, all the death, all the hard choices he'd made. The labors had purified him in the eyes of the gods, perhaps, but they hadn't erased what had happened, hadn't brought back those he'd lost. So Heracles did what heroes do. He kept moving forward. He took on other quests, other adventures. He joined the Argonauts for a time, sailing with Jason in search of the Golden Fleece. Though he left that quest early, his presence was too powerful, too dominant. The story was Jason's, not his. He helped the gods in their wars. When the giants attacked Olympus, the Gigantomachy, Zeus called on Heracles to fight alongside the gods. There was a prophecy, you see. The giants could only be defeated if a mortal hero fought with the gods. Heracles was that hero. He fought beside his father, shooting his poisoned arrows, using his strength to help bring down creatures that even the gods struggled to defeat. After that battle, his relationship with the Olympians changed slightly. He was no longer just Zeus's illegitimate son. He was a hero who'd aided the gods themselves, who'd proven his worth not just to mortals but to immortals. But personal peace, that still eluded him. Years passed. Heracles had more adventures, more fights, more victories, and eventually he met Deianira. She was a princess of Calydon, beautiful and strong-willed. Heracles won her hand in marriage by defeating the river god Achilles, who'd also been courting her. It was a fierce battle. Achilles could change forms, becoming a serpent, a bull, but Heracles defeated each form until the river god yielded. Heracles and Deianira married, and for a while they were happy. They had children together. They built a home. After all his wandering, all his labors, Heracles found something like peace. But peace for Heracles never lasted long. One day they were traveling together and came to a river. The waters were high, dangerous to cross. A centaur named Nessus offered to help. He was a ferryman, he said, who carried travelers across for a small fee. Heracles, suspicious of centaurs after his experience on Mount Erymanthus, decided to swim across himself. But he allowed Nessus to carry Deianira, since the waters were too dangerous for her. Heracles swam across and emerged on the far bank. He turned to watch Deianira and Nessus, and saw the centaur veering off course, carrying his wife away, trying to kidnap her. Rage filled Heracles. Not again. He wouldn't lose another wife. He grabbed his bow, knocked one of his arrows, still tipped with Hydra venom, still deadly, and shot. The arrow flew across the river and struck Nessus in the back. The centaur screamed, stumbled, collapsed on the riverbank. The poison was working, killing him quickly, but before he died, Nessus did something terrible. He called to Deianira, gasping, "Lady, I'm dying, but I can give you something. A gift. My blood mixed with this poison makes a love potion. If your husband ever strays, if he ever looks at another woman, put this on his clothing. It will bring his love back to you. It will bind him to you forever." It was a lie, a dying centaur's revenge. But Deianira didn't know that. She collected some of Nessus's blood in a vial, mixed with the poison from the wound. She hid it away, hoping she'd never need to use it, but keeping it just in case. Years passed. Heracles and Deianira had a good marriage mostly. But Heracles was still Heracles, restless, ambitious, always seeking the next challenge. And eventually, as so many heroes did, he became involved with another woman. Her name was Iole, a princess. The details of how they met, whether he truly loved her or it was just a passing attraction, those vary in different tellings. What matters is that Deianira heard about it, heard that her husband was interested in another woman. She remembered Nessus's gift, the love potion. If she used it, Heracles' affection would return to her. He would love only her again. She had seemed like the answer to her fears, so she took one of Heracles' tunics, a white ceremonial robe he was planning to wear at a sacrifice, and she rubbed Nessus's blood into it. Just a little, just enough to work the charm. Then she sent the robe to Heracles. He received it, pleased with the gift from his wife. He put it on to perform the sacrifice, standing before the altar, ready to honor the gods, and then the poison began to work. The Hydra's venom, mixed with Nessus's blood, activated by the warmth of Heracles' body. It began to burn, not just heat. It felt like fire, like his skin was being eaten away. He tried to tear the robe off, but it had fused to his flesh. Every pull just tore his skin away with it. The pain was beyond anything he'd ever experienced, beyond the labors, beyond any wound he'd taken. The poison was burning him from the outside in, and there was no way to stop it. Heracles screamed. He raged. In his agony, he threw his servant who'd brought the robe into the sea. He tore up trees, smashed altars. The strongest man in the world, reduced to writhing in unendurable pain. They carried him home. Deianira saw what her gift had done, realized too late that Nessus had lied, that she'd poisoned her own husband. Overcome with grief and guilt, she hanged herself. Heracles, still burning, still in agony, understood there was no cure. The Hydra's poison couldn't be neutralized. He was going to die, slowly, horribly, burning alive. He refused to die that way. He'd faced death with dignity so many times, defeated so many monsters. He wouldn't end writhing and screaming. He had his friends carry him to Mount Oita. There he built a funeral pyre, a massive pile of wood. He climbed on top of it, wrapped himself in the Nemean Lion's skin one last time and lay down. He asked his friends to light the fire. None of them could do it. They couldn't bring themselves to burn the greatest hero Greece had ever known. Finally, a young man named Philoctetes agreed. In exchange, Heracles gave him his bow and his arrows, those famous arrows tipped with Hydra venom. Philoctetes lit the pyre. The flames rose, consuming the wood, reaching for Heracles. And there on the pyre, as the fire burned away his mortal body, something happened. The mortal part of Heracles, the part that was Alcmene's son, the part that could die, burned away. But the divine part, the part that was Zeus's son, the part that had always been there, giving him his strength, that remained. Zeus, watching from Olympus, reached down with a bolt of lightning and lifted Heracles from the pyre. The hero's mortal form was gone. What rose to Olympus was pure, divine, immortal. Heracles had become a god. He stood on Olympus transformed, no longer the tormented hero, no longer the man burdened by guilt and grief. He was divine now, freed from mortal pain, from mortal death. from all the suffering that had defined his life. And there on Olympus, someone waited for him, Hera, the goddess who had hated him from birth, who had sent serpents to his cradle, who had driven him to madness, caused him to kill his family, orchestrated the labors, interfered at every turn to make his life harder. Hera, his eternal enemy, she stood before him now, and she spoke, Heracles, "You have endured everything I sent against you. You have completed impossible tasks. You have suffered beyond measure. And you never broke. You never gave up. You never stopped moving forward." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, not hateful, not angry, but almost respectful. "I hated you because you were proof of Zeus's infidelity, a constant reminder of my humiliation. But you never chose to be born. You never asked for any of this, and yet you endured it all with courage and strength. You earned your glory. You earned the name you bear, glory of Hera." She held out her hand. "Let there be peace between us. Let the old hatred end. You have proven yourself worthy to stand among the gods." Heracles took her hand. After everything, all the pain, all the loss, all the years of enmity, they made peace. As a sign of reconciliation, Hera gave Heracles her daughter as a bride. Hebe, goddess of youth, became his wife, the hero who had suffered so much, who had grown old through trials and labors, was married to youth itself, renewed, restored. On Olympus, Heracles found what had always eluded him in life: peace. He sat among the gods, honored and respected. He was worshipped throughout Greece, not just as a hero but as a god. Temples were built in his name. Athletes invoked him for strength. Soldiers prayed to him for courage. He had begun life cursed, marked for suffering from his first breath. He had committed terrible deeds, suffered terrible losses. He had been driven to perform 12 impossible labors, each one a trial, each one a step on a long road, and at the end of that road, he found redemption, forgiveness, transformation. The mortal Heracles, the man who struggled, who failed, who suffered, was gone. But what he had become was greater, a symbol of human potential, of perseverance, of the strength to keep going no matter how heavy the burden. The Greeks told his story for centuries. They understood something important in it, that we all carry burdens. We all face impossible tasks. We all suffer losses and make mistakes and wonder if we can continue. Heracles' story said you can, one step at a time, one labor at a time. Keep moving forward, and eventually you'll reach the end. You'll find peace. You'll be transformed by what you've endured, from tragedy to triumph, from mortal to immortal, from broken man to the greatest hero who ever lived. That was Heracles. That was his journey. And his story, like the hero himself, is eternal. Let's leave him there on Olympus, at peace finally, sitting beside Hebe, honored by gods and mortals alike. The labors are over. The suffering is ended. The glory is earned. And now, as his story closes, as we've walked with him from his cursed birth to his divine transformation, it's time for us to return from these ancient tales. Time to let Heracles rest. Time to let ourselves rest too. And so we come to the end of our journey tonight. We've traveled far with Heracles, haven't we? From his cursed beginning to his divine end. From the serpents in his cradle to his throne on Olympus. We've walked beside him through 12 impossible labors, watched him face monsters and gods, seen him carry burdens that would have crushed anyone else. It's been a long night. A long story, but that's what Heracles' story is, epic in every sense. Not just in scope, but in meaning. Not just a tale of strength, but a tale of redemption. Think about what we've seen. A man who made a terrible mistake, not even really his fault, driven to madness by a vengeful goddess. A man who could have given up, could have let that mistake define him forever. But instead he chose to atone, to accept whatever penance was demanded, to complete every impossible task, no matter how hard, no matter how long it took. The Nemean Lion taught him that sometimes brute strength is exactly what's needed. The Hydra taught him that some problems require teamwork and creativity. The Ceryneian Hind taught him patience. The Augean stables taught him cleverness. Each labor was a lesson. Each challenge changed him slightly, shaped him, made him not just stronger but wiser, more complete, and at the end of it all, he found what he'd been seeking. Not just freedom from his servitude, but freedom from his guilt. Not just the completion of tasks, but the transformation of himself. The Greeks loved this story. They told it and retold it, added to it, changed details, but always kept the core. The hero who endures, who perseveres, who never gives up. They worshipped Heracles not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. Because he struggled, failed, suffered, and kept going anyway. That resonates, doesn't it? We all carry our own burdens. Maybe not the weight of the sky, maybe not a lion to strangle or a Hydra to slay, but burdens nonetheless. Challenges that seem impossible, mistakes we're trying to atone for, paths we have to walk that seem too long, too hard. Heracles' story reminds us, one step at a time, one task at a time. Keep moving forward even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, and remember Heracles didn't do it alone. He had help. Hyalus with the torches at the Hydra, Athena with the castanets for the birds. Atlas, even though he tried to trick Heracles, still got the apples. Even the labors that seemed like solo achievements were made possible by knowledge gained, by relationships forged, by help accepted. There's no shame in needing help. Even the strongest man who ever lived needed help sometimes. Tonight, we've spent time with one of humanity's oldest heroes, a character invented thousands of years ago, but still relevant, still meaningful, still teaching us about courage and perseverance and redemption. The ancient Greeks are gone. Their temples are ruins. The last prayer to Heracles was spoken centuries ago, but the story remains, and perhaps that's its own kind of immortality. Not divine, but human. The immortality of being remembered, of mattering enough that people keep telling your story millennia after you're gone. So let's honor Heracles now, as we let his story close. The hero who was born cursed but died divine. The man who suffered more than most but endured all of it. The strongest person ever, not just in body but in spirit. May we all have a fraction of his strength when we face our own labors. May we all have his perseverance when the path seems too long. May we all keep moving forward one step at a time, toward whatever waits at the end of our journey. Take a slow breath now. In and out. Feel your body resting wherever you are. Feel the weight of the blankets, the softness beneath you. You've traveled far tonight, through ancient stories, through impossible challenges, but now it's time to rest. The labors are complete. The story is told. Heracles sits on Olympus at peace at last. And you're here now, safe and comfortable, ready for sleep. Let the old stories drift away. Let the heroes and monsters fade back into myth. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Just rest, just breathe. Just be the night is quiet. The world is still. And somewhere in the realm of memory and imagination, Heracles watches over those who invoke his name, offering his strength to anyone who needs the courage to face their own impossible tasks. But that's for tomorrow. For now, just sleep. May your dreams be peaceful. May your rest be deep. May you wake refreshed, carrying perhaps a whisper of heroic strength with you into your day. Sleep well, friend. The greatest hero's tale is told, and you've been here for all of it. Walking the path with him, witnessing his transformation from tragedy to triumph. Rest now. You've earned it. Good night.